I still remember the first evening she entered my house, as if she owned it. Her perfume arrived before she did, that sharp, sweet scent that filled every corner of the living room. My son followed behind her, carrying the groceries she had insisted on bringing. "Mother," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you really shouldn't live alone anymore. We'll take care of everything now." It sounded kind, but something in her tone made my stomach tighten. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. After all, she was young, modern, confident, everything I once was. But there was a coldness behind her gestures, a calculating precision that felt rehearsed. She started by helping me with bills, then offering to manage my appointments, saying it would ease my burden. My son smiled proudly, as if she were doing me a favor. He couldn't see that every favor came with a hook. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, the house I built with my late husband began to change. Curtains replaced, furniture rearranged, documents suddenly missing from drawers I hadn't opened in years. When I asked about it, she would laugh lightly. "You're too old to keep up with all this paperwork, Mom. Don't worry, I'm organizing everything for you." Those words, "you're too old," echoed in my mind like a whisper I couldn't silence. I noticed my son stopped discussing finances with me. He used to ask for my advice on every decision, from the smallest expense to the investments his father had left him. Now, every time I brought it up, he would glance at her first, waiting for her approval. "We're taking care of it," he'd say, almost apologetic. And I would nod, pretending to believe him. But deep down, I knew something had shifted, something dangerous. One morning, while cleaning the kitchen, I overheard them arguing. Her voice was sharp, his trembling. "She doesn't need to know everything," she snapped. I froze behind the door, heart pounding. Then silence. When they came out, both were smiling as if nothing had happened. But from that day on, I started watching. Quietly, patiently. Because if there's one thing age gives you, it's not weakness. It's time to observe what others are too impatient to hide. It began with a missing envelope. A small thing, really, just a yellow folder where I kept the deeds to our land and the keys to the old safe my husband used to open once a year. I'd kept it in the same drawer for decades, under the lace tablecloth. One morning it was gone. I searched every corner of that house until the sun went down, whispering to myself, maybe I misplaced it. But deep down I knew I hadn't. Something or someone had moved it. When I asked my son, he frowned and said, "Mom, maybe you forgot where you put it." And then she added, smiling, "Yes, you've been so forgetful lately. Maybe it's time we help you keep things safe." Her voice was honey, but her eyes cold glass. I wanted to shout, to remind them both that I wasn't senile. But I swallowed my pride. I knew shouting would only make me look weaker, and that's exactly what she wanted. Days later, new mail started arriving with my name spelled wrong, addressed to Mrs. Ellen Carter, care of Olivia Hartman. Her name, my documents. The same handwriting appeared on checks and bank letters. When I confronted my son, he avoided my gaze. "Olivia's just organizing things for us, Mom. It's easier if she manages the accounts." I felt my throat close. The us he spoke of no longer included me. That night, I stayed awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles. My late husband's voice echoed in my memory. "Always keep your papers close, Ellen. They're your shield." But my shield was already in someone else's hands. And that someone was smiling in my kitchen, calling me mother, while quietly rewriting the story of my life in her own handwriting. The phone rang early in the morning, that old rotary tone echoing through the quiet house. I answered half asleep, expecting a friend or maybe the pharmacy. But the voice on the other end was formal, too formal. "Mrs. Carter? This is David from First National Bank. We're just calling to confirm the transfer you approved yesterday." I froze. What transfer? The line went silent for a moment. I could almost hear him checking the papers. The wire transfer of $82,000 to a private account under the name O. Hartman. It was signed electronically under your authorization. My blood ran cold. "I didn't authorize anything," I said, clutching the phone so tightly my fingers trembled. The man hesitated, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. "Perhaps your family member, your daughter-in-law, handled it on your behalf?" he said carefully. I didn't even answer. I just hung up and sat there, staring at the kitchen wall, heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to scream for my son, to demand answers, but something inside me told me to wait. If she had the nerve to move that kind of money, then this wasn't her first step, it was her final one. And if I confronted her too soon, she'd cover her tracks before I could prove anything. So I sat in silence, letting the tears blur the edges of the room. That night, I looked at my reflection in the window. Wrinkled, tired, but not broken. "You think I'm too old to understand," I whispered to myself, "but I see you clearer than ever." The war had begun. She just didn't know I was still capable of fighting. That Sunday, she insisted on cooking dinner. "You deserve to rest, Mom," she said, smiling as she stirred the pot. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and deceit. My son sat at the table, distracted, his phone glowing under the dim light. They looked like a perfect couple, young, united, confident. And me, sitting there like a relic from another time, pretending not to see the storm forming right in front of me. She served the food with theatrical kindness, placing my plate last. "Careful, it's hot," she said, touching my hand just a little too long, like a warning disguised as affection. I thanked her politely, but my stomach turned. I watched her every move, every glance she exchanged with my son. They spoke in half sentences, coded phrases that meant more than they said. "It's almost done," she whispered once, and he nodded without looking up. Almost done. What was almost done? Halfway through dinner, I mentioned the bank call. "Strange thing," I said, cutting my meat slowly. "Someone tried to transfer money in my name." The knife froze halfway to her mouth. Her smile flickered, just for a second, before she recovered. "Oh, banks make mistakes all the time, don't they, darling?" she said to my son, who looked at me with confusion. "Mom, you probably misunderstood," he said softly. "Technology can be tricky." I smiled back, just as sweetly. "Maybe you're right," I said. "I'm too old to understand how it all works." The table went quiet for a heartbeat too long. I could feel her eyes burning into me, not with guilt, but with fear that I might actually know more than I let on. That night, when they went home, I stood alone in the kitchen and whispered to the empty plates, "You're right, dear. I'm old. But I didn't get this old by being stupid." It was mid-afternoon when Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door, gentle, like she always did. She'd lived across the street for 30 years and had seen everything that ever happened on our little road. Her gray hair was tied neatly, and her eyes carried that look people get when they know something they wish they didn't. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by, Ellen," she said, stepping inside. "I just thought you should know. I saw your daughter-in-law down at the bank again yesterday. She was talking to the manager, looked like she was signing papers. Your name came up." My heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded. Positive. I thought it was strange, because she mentioned something about the old woman's estate and speeding things up before the holidays. For a moment, everything around me blurred. The ticking clock, the smell of tea, even the light through the curtains. It all felt unreal. Mrs. Henderson touched my hand gently. "I didn't mean to worry you, dear, but I thought you'd want to know." I thanked her, trying to keep my composure. But as soon as she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was darker than I'd imagined. That night, I went through every drawer, every box, every folder, searching for something she hadn't taken yet. And buried inside an old cookbook, I found it, a photocopy of my husband's last will. My son was never meant to control the assets alone. Everything was under my name until I decided otherwise. And somehow, that was the very decision she wanted to take from me. The next morning, I went to the drawer where I kept the few documents I still trusted were mine. Bills, insurance, letters from the pension office, all neatly folded, untouched. At least, that's what I thought. But when I lifted one envelope, I found something strange underneath, a printed statement from the bank, with my name at the bottom and a signature that looked almost like mine. Almost. The slant was right, but the pressure was wrong. My husband used to say I pressed too hard when I signed anything, years of habit. This one was lighter, smoother, mechanical. I traced it with my finger, my pulse racing. Someone had signed as me, and I didn't need a detective to guess who. I took the paper to the window, letting the light expose every line. The signature wasn't the only thing wrong. The date, too, didn't match any of my visits. The document authorized access to my investment account, the one tied to our old property. The same property my husband had always called the family's heart. I sat down slowly, gripping the paper like it was alive. "So that's how you did it?" I whispered. "You didn't steal it, you rewrote it." I felt anger rise in my chest, burning through the sadness that had been weighing me down for weeks. She thought I would notice, that my age made me blind. But age doesn't dull the mind. It sharpens it in ways the young can't imagine. That evening, I made myself tea and hid the document under the floorboard in my bedroom, next to an old photo of my husband. "You always said the truth hides in plain sight," I murmured to his picture. "Well, let's see how long she can keep her lies in the dark." It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw her leave the house in a hurry. She didn't take the car. She walked, dressed in a beige coat and dark glasses, moving quickly, like someone with something to hide. My son was still at work, so I decided to follow her. My heart pounded as I slipped on my old cardigan, grabbed my purse, and quietly locked the door behind me. She turned the corner toward Main Street, checking her phone every few seconds. I stayed far enough behind, blending in with the afternoon crowd. She finally stopped near the old cafe by the square, the one my husband and I used to visit on Sundays. Through the window, I saw her sit across from a man in a gray suit. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend. And the way she leaned in to whisper told me everything. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't innocent. I sat on the bench outside, pretending to read a newspaper while my pulse raced. After a few minutes, the man handed her a folder. She opened it, signed something quickly, and then smiled. That same smug smile she wore the day she told me, "You're too old to understand." When they parted, she looked around before walking away. For a moment, her eyes brushed over the window, and I froze. But she didn't see me. As soon as she disappeared down the street, I went inside. The waiter recognized me and said, "Your daughter-in-law left a receipt on the table, Mrs. Carter. Would you like to take it?" My hands trembled as I accepted it. On the crumpled paper, beneath the price of 2 coffees, was a note scribbled in blue ink. "Next meeting. Finalize the transfer." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my bag. My hands were shaking, but my mind was sharp. She thought she was dealing with an old woman. She had no idea she'd just left her first trace behind. That night, I waited until they both left for dinner with friends. The house was finally quiet, the kind of silence that carries both fear and opportunity. My hands shook as I unlocked the door to my son's office. He had changed everything since moving in. New furniture, new curtains, but the air still carried his father's scent. Paper, wood, and trust. I moved slowly, scanning every shelf. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, in the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a key taped under the handle. My husband used to hide things the same way. I took it, my pulse quickening, and searched the room until I found a small metal cabinet tucked behind a stack of boxes. The key fit perfectly. Inside were folders, neat, labeled, and too professional for a household. Carter Estate, Revision 1 read. I opened it, and my breath caught. There were photocopies of my ID, financial statements, and a document stamped, Transfer of Ownership. At the bottom, there was my signature again, forged, and a notary's seal I didn't recognize. But what made my knees weaken was the last page, an email printout between Olivia and the man I'd seen at the cafe. "She'll never know until it's too late. The funds will be cleared by next week." For a moment, the world tilted. My own son's name appeared on the CC line. I refused to believe it. He could know, he couldn't be part of this. But another voice whispered inside me, "What if he does?" I closed the folder and hid it in my purse. Standing there in the dark, I realized something chilling. They hadn't just stolen money. They were erasing me, piece by piece, from the story I built with my husband. And if I didn't act soon, there would be nothing left of me but a memory they'd eventually rewrite too. I waited all day for the right moment to speak to my son. The folder was hidden beneath my shawl, my heart pounding like a drum. When he came home, I saw the same boy who used to run to me when thunder scared him. I wanted to believe that boy still lived somewhere inside the man standing before me. "Can we talk?" I asked softly. He smiled, distracted. "Of course, Mom. What's wrong?" I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, she entered the room. "Talk about what?" she asked, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. She walked over and placed her hand on his shoulder. I could feel the balance of power shift instantly. I tried to hold my ground. "It's about some papers I found," I said. "Documents with my signature on them, ones I never signed." Her expression didn't even flinch. Instead, she laughed gently. "Oh dear, those again? You told me last week you've been mixing up the mail. Remember?" She turned to my son, her voice dripping with concern. "I think she's getting confused again, honey. Maybe it's time we make that doctor's appointment." My son frowned, torn. "Mom, is this about the estate again?" I felt my chest tighten. "It's not confusion," I said, louder this time. "Someone forged my name." But he only looked at me with pity, that terrible look people give when they've already decided you're fragile. Olivia sighed softly. "She's been under so much stress lately," she said. "I think we should take over the finances completely, just until things settle." And just like that, the conversation I'd prepared in my head for days vanished into thin air. I stood there, folder in hand, and realized the cruelest part wasn't that they didn't believe me. It was that she'd already planned every word before I even spoke. That night, I cried quietly, not because I'd lost the fight, but because I finally understood what kind of battle I was in. This wasn't a war of proof, it was a war of perception. And she was winning. 2 days later, Olivia announced it like good news. "We've got you an appointment, Mom," she said cheerfully over breakfast. "Just a routine checkup. You've been under a lot of stress, and we care about your well-being." Her words were coated in honey, but her eyes glinted like glass. My son smiled, relieved. "It's for your own good," he said. "Dr. Jacobs is the best in town." I nodded, pretending to agree. "Of course, dear. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." But inside, I knew exactly what it was. I'd heard enough stories from other women at church, widows whose families slowly declared them unfit to manage their estates. It started with kindness, with smiles, with the word care. And it ended with signatures, court papers, and silence. The doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and lies. Dr. Jacobs was polite, but distant. He asked questions that seemed harmless. "Do you ever forget dates? Have you felt confused recently?" Yet each answer felt like a trap. Olivia sat beside me, pretending to comfort, occasionally interrupting. "She's been misplacing things," she said. "And sometimes she forgets what day it is." I smiled faintly and turned to the doctor. "Oh, I don't forget days, doctor. I just pretend to sometimes to see who takes advantage of it." He froze, his pen midair. Olivia laughed nervously, trying to redirect the moment. But the message had landed. When we left, she was furious. I could see it in the tightness of her jaw. "You embarrass me in there," she hissed as we walked to the car. I looked at her, calm and steady. "No, dear. I reminded you I'm still here." She didn't answer, but I could feel the temperature between us change. She knew now I wasn't as easy to bury as she'd hoped. I waited until they both left for work before calling Mr. Green, my late husband's attorney. His voice on the phone hadn't changed, calm, slow, deliberate. "Mrs. Carter? It's been years. How are you holding up?" he asked kindly. I hesitated before answering. "I'm not sure anymore, Mr. Green. I think someone's trying to erase me from my own life." He agreed to meet that afternoon, away from the house. I took the bus to his office, the same one where my husband and I had signed our will decades ago. Sitting in that chair again felt like stepping into a memory that had been tampered with. "Do you still have a copy of my husband's will?" I asked. He nodded, pulling a thick folder from his cabinet. "Of course. I keep everything." When he placed the document before me, my hands trembled. The paper smelled faintly of dust and truth. As I read, my eyes filled with tears. The original will left full authority under my name until my passing. No clause allowed transfers, revisions, or secondary ownership without my written consent, notarized and verified in person. "But that's not what the bank said," I whispered. "They claim there's an updated version." Mr. Green frowned. "Updated? I was never contacted about any update." He opened his system, scrolling through records. No new filings, no requests for authorization. Nothing legal has been processed. He paused, then looked at me seriously. "Mrs. Carter, if someone has a newer version, it's a forgery." The words hit me like thunder. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't confused. I was right. And suddenly, fear turned into resolve. "Can you help me prove it?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I can, but we'll need evidence. Real, dated, physical evidence." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I'd found hidden in my son's office. His face went pale as he flipped through it. "This," he said, "is enough to start." For the first time in months, I felt the faintest spark of hope. I spent the following week pretending to forget, pretending to misplace things, pretending to agree. Olivia believed her plan was working, that the doctor's visit had shaken me into quiet compliance. But behind every nod and polite smile, I was taking notes. Every phone call she made, every paper she carried into the study, every visit from that man in the gray suit, I watched it all. Mr. Green had given me a list of things to gather: copies of bank statements, mail envelopes with postmarks, anything that could prove tampering. So, every night, after they went to sleep, I'd creep into the office, photograph the documents, and hide the evidence in a place no one would dare check, under the lining of my husband's old violin case. It felt poetic somehow. The same violin that once filled this house with love now held the proof of betrayal. During the days, I played the role of the fragile mother. I let her serve my meals, handle the phone calls, even help me with medication I never swallowed. She called me sweet names again: Mom, darling, dear, as if the venom in her words had been rinsed clean. But behind her eyes, I saw fear. She could sense that I was no longer breaking, I was waiting. One night, I overheard her on the phone again. "Don't worry, she'll sign it next week," she said, voice low, urgent. "She doesn't even know what she's agreeing to." But I knew. I knew exactly what she was planning, and I wasn't going to stop her. Not yet. Because now I had something she didn't: a witness, a lawyer, and time. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Sometimes you don't fight evil by shouting. You fight it by letting it reveal itself, until there's nowhere left for it to hide. It was a quiet morning when Olivia brought me a tray of tea and a folder. "Mom," she said sweetly, "we just need your signature here. Nothing complicated. It's just for the insurance renewal. The company requires the homeowner's consent." Her smile was gentle, her voice steady. If I had known better, I might have believed her. But I did know better. I took the folder, pretending to squint. "My eyesight isn't what it used to be," I said softly. "Could you read it for me?" She hesitated. "Oh, it's just a formality, really. You don't need to read all that legal jargon." Her words slipped out too fast, too polished. I nodded slowly. "Of course, dear. I trust you." She handed me the pen, my husband's old fountain pen, the one she'd once said was too outdated. I held it over the paper, and just as she exhaled in relief, the doorbell rang. She flinched. I smiled. "Expecting someone?" I asked. "No, probably a delivery," she said quickly. But when she opened the door, her face went pale. It was Mr. Green. "Good morning," he said calmly, stepping inside. "I believe Mrs. Carter wanted me to review some documents before signing?" The silence that followed was almost sacred. Olivia froze, her hands shaking. "Oh, that won't be necessary," she murmured, backing away. Mr. Green opened the folder, scanned the pages, and frowned. "This isn't an insurance form," he said sharply. "It's a property reassignment contract." He turned to me. "If you had signed this, Mrs. Carter, you'd have transferred full ownership of your estate to your daughter-in-law." I looked at Olivia, then really looked at her. The mask was gone. Her charm evaporated, replaced by something raw and ugly. "You see," I said softly, "maybe I'm too old to understand, but I still know how to read." That evening, my son came home earlier than usual. His face was tense, his voice colder than I'd ever heard. "What did you do, Mom?" he asked, standing in the doorway. Olivia was behind him, tears streaming down her face like a perfect performance. "She humiliated me," she cried. "In front of everyone. She called me a thief." I stood up slowly, gripping the edge of a chair. "You forged my signature, Olivia," I said quietly. "You tried to steal the house your husband's father built with his own hands." My son shook his head, confused. "That's not true," he said. "She showed me the papers. You gave permission weeks ago." I looked at him, heartbroken. "Did you see me sign them? Or did she tell you I did?" He hesitated just for a second, but that second was all it took for her to strike. "She's losing her memory," Olivia shouted. "You saw how the doctor looked at her. She's paranoid. She's accusing everyone." Her words came out sharp, desperate, her mask cracking with every breath. I could almost see the fear behind her performance. Mr. Green, who had stayed to witness everything, cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, "I've already submitted the forged documents to the authorities. They'll verify the signatures. If you're innocent, Mrs. Hartman, you have nothing to worry about." Her face turned white. She looked at me with a hatred so deep it almost made me pity her. Almost. My son stood between us, lost, the truth finally too loud to ignore. I wanted to comfort him, but I didn't. Some lessons must be learned through pain. And as she stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her, I knew the storm wasn't over yet, but for the first time, it wasn't mine to fear. The rain began before midnight, heavy, relentless, pounding against the windows like a warning. I sat alone in the living room, the lights dimmed, a cup of untouched tea trembling in my hand. Every flash of lightning painted the room white for a heartbeat, and in that silence between thunder, I felt it, a presence outside. Then came the knock. 3 sharp hits against the door. When I opened it, Olivia stood there, drenched, mascara streaking down her face. "We need to talk," she said, voice shaking. "Please, Ellen. I never meant for it to go this far." Her words were desperate, yet her eyes still carried that cold spark of calculation. "They're going to ruin us," she pleaded. "If you don't withdraw the complaint, we'll all lose everything, your son, too." I stayed still. "You already ruined us," I said softly. "You took what wasn't yours and blamed me for seeing it." She stepped closer, gripping my wrist. "You don't understand. I did it for him. For your son." Her voice cracked under the storm's roar. "He needed me. I gave him purpose. I gave him a future. You gave him lies," I interrupted. "You made him believe he needed saving from the very person who raised him." For a long moment, we stood there, the storm raging, thunder shaking the walls. Then she whispered, "If I go down, I'm not going alone." Her grip tightened, and for a second, I saw what she truly was, not a villain in a story, but a frightened child clinging to her illusion of control. I gently pulled my hand away. "You've already lost, Olivia," I said. "The storm outside will pass. The one inside you won't." She left without another word, vanishing into the rain. I closed the door, locked it, and stood in the silence that followed. For the first time in months, I felt safe, not because the danger was gone, but because I had faced it head-on. The storm passed with the dawn. The world outside was washed clean, but the house still carried the scent of rain and memory. I stood by the window, watching the clouds break apart, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt like peace. By mid-morning, the police came. 2 officers, polite but firm, asking for Olivia. I told them she had left the night before and hadn't returned. They exchanged a look, thanked me, and left with a folder, the same folder that had once been my greatest fear. Now it was my salvation. Mr. Green handled the rest, his voice steady as he guided the officers through the details. Forgery, attempted fraud, property manipulation, I heard him say. Words that once sounded distant now felt like justice. My son didn't come home that day. But when he finally appeared the next morning, he looked smaller somehow, like the man he was had collapsed under the truth. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." His voice cracked, and I saw the boy he once was, the one who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard. I reached out, resting my hand on his cheek. "I know," I said. "That's why it hurts." He broke down, sobbing into my shoulder, repeating her name like a confession. I didn't need to tell him I'd already forgiven him. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me, so that the bitterness wouldn't take root where love once lived. When he left for work again, I sat alone in the kitchen, sunlight touching the old wooden table. Everything had changed, yet everything was the same. The house was still mine. My name still meant something. And though my heart ached, I felt something stronger than pain, the quiet dignity of survival. A few days after the storm, I decided to clean the attic, not out of need, but out of instinct. That old space had been left untouched since my husband's death. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts, and the faint scent of cedar reminded me of the man who once called this house a fortress of love. I opened a wooden chest, expecting nothing more than old clothes and faded photos. Instead, I found a bundle of envelopes tied with a blue ribbon. My name was written on the top one in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. Inside were letters, dated months before his death. In them, he spoke of worry, of intuition. "If anything ever happens to me, Ellen," he wrote, "be careful with who takes an interest in our property. Wealth attracts not only greed, but deception disguised as affection." Each letter revealed a different piece of him, his love, his foresight, his warning. "Never sign anything without understanding it fully," one said. "And if you ever doubt your strength, remember, wisdom outlives youth every time." By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the ink. He had known. Somehow, he had sensed that the greatest threat to our family would come not from strangers, but from someone welcomed into our home. Those letters weren't just words, they were a map, a message from the past guiding me back to myself. I placed them carefully in the same violin case where I'd hidden the evidence, sealing the two stories together, his foresight and my survival. As I closed the lid, I whispered, "You are right, my love." And I learned the lesson, not through fear, but through fire. The courthouse smelled of paper, dust, and nerves. I hadn't been there in decades, not since my husband's business days. But that morning, walking through those heavy wooden doors, I felt strangely calm, as if every step carried the weight of everyone who had ever underestimated me. Mr. Green walked beside me, briefcase in hand, his voice low. "We have everything we need, Mrs. Carter. The truth will speak for itself." Olivia sat across the room, her once perfect posture wilted under the fluorescent lights. Gone was the confidence, the charm. She looked smaller now, her beauty dulled by sleepless nights and lies catching up to her. When her lawyer tried to argue that I'd misunderstood the documents, Mr. Green simply opened the folder and laid out every page, one by one. Signatures, dates, forged seals, even the receipt from that cafe. Each piece of evidence cut through the room like thunder. The judge, an older woman with eyes sharp as glass, turned to me. "Mrs. Carter, do you wish to say anything before we proceed?" I stood, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of truth finally being free. "Yes," I said softly. "I may be old, Your Honor, but I'm not blind. Age doesn't make us foolish. It just teaches us what kind of smiles to fear." A silence followed, deep and final. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to Olivia. "The court finds the defendant guilty of forgery, fraud, and attempted theft." Her gavel struck the desk, and the sound echoed through me like closure. Olivia didn't look at me as they led her away. But I didn't need her to. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth standing tall after being buried alive. And that morning, truth finally stood again, wearing wrinkles and a steady heart. When I came back home, the house felt different. Not emptier, just quieter, honest, stripped of illusion. The walls no longer echoed with tension. The air was lighter, as if even the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I set my purse on the table and sat down, listening to the faint ticking of the clock. For months, that sound had been unbearable. Now, it felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some pitied me, others congratulated me, but I didn't want either. I didn't win anything. I simply reclaimed what was already mine. That night, I lit one of my husband's old cigars and placed it on the porch railing, the way he used to. The smoke curled upward into the evening sky, and I smiled. We did it, I whispered. Not out of vengeance, but out of love. My son visited a few days later. His eyes were swollen from sleeplessness, but he looked lighter, humbled. He apologized, not with words at first, but by mowing the lawn, fixing the fence, cooking dinner. Every action was a quiet confession. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right, Mom. I touched his hand gently. Don't, I said. Just live honestly. That's enough. In the evenings, I began to play my husband's violin again. The sound was rough at first, but slowly, the melody returned. It filled the rooms with something purer than before, not the music of happiness, but the music of peace. And as the days passed, I realized that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing freedom over bitterness. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. People think getting old means losing things, your strength, your memory, your place in the world. But what they don't tell you is that, with age, you gain something far rarer, clarity. You stop confusing love with dependence, kindness with submission, and silence with weakness. I learned that too late, perhaps, but life has its own timing. It teaches through pain what comfort could never explain. Sometimes, when I walk through the garden, I still hear my husband's laughter carried in the wind. I imagine him smiling, proud not because I fought, but because I never surrendered. He used to say, "You don't need to raise your voice to be strong, Ellen. Just stand still and let the truth make the noise for you." And it did. In the end, it did. My son and I talk again, though we tread gently around the past. Some wounds heal slowly, but that's all right. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting it poison you. I see the guilt in his eyes, but I also see understanding, and that's enough. Understanding is how love returns after being broken. I often sit on the porch at sunset, watching the sky change colors. There's peace in knowing the storm came, tried to destroy everything, and yet, I'm still here. My name, my home, my story, all still mine. I smile at the thought that the girl who once doubted her strength became a woman who outlasted deceit. So, if anyone ever tells you that you're too old to understand, smile kindly. Because maybe you don't need to understand. Maybe you've already seen enough to know exactly how the story ends.